No, it's wonderful to be here again. Yeah, it's I think 10 years since I had my show here. So it's seen dramatic changes, obviously, and it's amazing to see such a wonderful survey show of this great man in this modern setting. Um, so, as Martin said, I'm an artist. I trained at the Royal Academy. I had quite an academic training. In that sense, postgraduate training. A lot of that emphasis was on anatomical drawing, life study, the representation of the human form and animal form. So, in that sense, I feel quite steeped in a tradition maybe shared by Stubbs. Um, but that's really kind of the starting point for this presentation. I really want to talk about his motivation and his experience of making his work from the position and perspective of an artist. Now, this is a bit different from the perspective of an art historian. I think when we look at paintings generally, we see them as the end point of a concept that has been brilliantly manifested in the case of Stubbs's work. And that's almost the beginning point for us. It's the launching point for understanding his motivations. For me, when I look at his work, I'm looking at them almost as the end point of the process. I'm looking at what was the experience for him that was necessary to have with the subject, the horse or the animal, whatever, for him to be able to render that painting in the way that he did. So this talks a lot about experience. So how, as an artist, do I relate to his work? I think I relate to his immersion in the encounter with a non-human animal. I see him creating an extraordinary connection with his subject. In my practice, I understand this connection as a place where, or as a space where knowledge is felt as an experience, and where a sense of self is necessarily abandoned. A space which is an experience of neither self nor animal, but of a merging. This is a space which can liberate definitions and dissolve hierarchies. And I think that's the radical thing about it. So this is his comparative study of the tiger here. And he went to great lengths to understand what constituted an animal. We see in much of the works in the exhibition his involvement and his immersion into the physicality of these animals. He wanted to understand them inside out. This is an early work I made. This is comparing myself to all the British amphibians. So this is a photograph I took maybe 30 years ago, and then maybe 10 years ago, 2013. I put them all next to each other in the form of a book. So the relational comparison is basically based on scale. So I'm using myself to try and understand the difference between myself and a set of animals in this case. So what was it about the animal that obsessed Stubbs? Was it a challenge that went beyond depicting fellow humans? Or could he work with animals in a way that he could never have worked with humans? Was it this level of scrutiny, this level of truth that he was driven to explore? This is another example of my work. This is an attempt for me to become or represent British moths. I've taken many photographs of myself covered in shaving foam. So we can see he literally wanted to get under the skin and know the animal in front of him inside out. And I would say this went beyond the need for an accurate depiction. This wasn't just a scientific study. I would say that he wanted, what he wanted was an image that was based on an experience of knowing the animal. This is a photograph called Self-Portrait as a Mayfly. It's me covered in dough. This is Self-Portrait as Red Fox. And this is me in a field with a red boiler suit on. And this photograph is taken from about a mile away. So these are all really making portraits of animals, but it was a bit about the experience of attempting to become the animal and what lay in the way of that. What was this human-animal divide? How do we reconcile that? And as a process, it's obviously futile. You know, I can't become that animal. And it's absurd. But the process felt quite radical in a way. There was a purpose in this psychological, physical, and fundamental experience. This is a portrait of a goshawk, quite a rare bird in Britain. It's me strapped up a tree, basically, to be clear. So these attempts, they were quite deliberately set out to challenge definitions of self, species boundaries, and most importantly, to explore the shared experience of being. Now, this exploration of becoming animal started to, in my work, involve other people, and I extended the possibilities of this becoming animal to others. And this is a piece I'm quite well known for my artistic practice. It's called Dawn Chorus. And I asked people to sing along. He's got a little earpiece in his ear. He's singing along to slowed down birdsong. The birdsong has been recorded in the wild and slowed down about 20 times. So he sits there for 2 hours singing along to very slow birdsong. Something like that. And then I film him doing that, and then I speed the film up 20 times. So this is the result. So that piece basically is a reenactment of the Dawn Chorus. Each of those people are on different screens. There's 14 screens in the gallery, and they all basically sing the birdsong Dawn Chorus as it happened in one woodland in the north of England. So it's an immersion, a physical, almost takes a level of endurance to immerse themselves in this almost consciousness of being this bird. They're performing this bird. They are becoming this bird. And I often deliberately use this idea of becoming animal on behalf of others. So this enables me to almost become like an actor becomes when they take on a character, to be able to speak from a place that isn't limited by my own self-consciousness or my own conscious thinking. This is a project I did in Liverpool. This housing block was being demolished. And I offered my services as an artist who could become an animal to help them with some of their questions. And the community there had a question, they were quite scared about their futures. So I offered to go in and perform a ritual in a way, as a set of animals for them actually, and come up with some ideas which I couldn't consciously do as myself, Marcus. So this is about becoming animal to extend the idea of knowledge and experiential knowledge. This is a project I did in Elephant Castle in London, where I literally became a horse on stage. This is the most appropriate for Stubbs, I think, and performed in front of 1,300 people. And this was about working for the community in Elephant Castle. to actually navigate some of the real problems they'd had, and to actually vent and manifest a lot of their anger out on stage in a public way. So I was working vicariously for them as an animal. So this is quite an odd piece to show you in the context of Stubbs, but I think this piece really illustrates this process of becoming and why I think this is so important. This piece relates to a concept of time, and the motivation behind making this piece was to understand time as much as possible. And I think about Stubbs in a way when I look at this work, because I think his intent to understand that horse or that animal in such an immersive and a complete way was almost, I can imagine, maddening. Almost it's obsessive. This is a piece I made when I wanted to know time, and I had to become time to know time. So I basically filmed myself for 12 hours pretending to move that second hand like that. And I looped that film so the film lasts 24 hours. And the film just carries on and on and on. So in a way, if you see this film, it's a working clock. It usually tells the right time. And it just goes on and on and on and on. So doing that for 12 hours literally sent me mad. But there were points within it where I had the experience of literally thinking that I was moving that second hand, although I was just moving on the surface of the glass. It felt like I literally had the measure of time, and I had become time. And it's that almost psychological state that I want to talk to you about Stubbs. I think Stubbs's obsession with knowing the horse necessitates his need to experience what it is to be a horse. You could say that this is an extreme form of empathy. He created an empathy with the horse through its bones, its cartilages, its muscles, its fascias, its ligaments, its nerves, its arteries, its veins, its glands. It was obsessive, but without wanting to sound mystical, you could say he was actually possessed by this motivation, possessed by the horse, by his appetite to know it and understand it. I would suggest that when he was in the act of drawing or painting a horse, he was in a dialogue with its very being. I would even say its spirit. He understands this animal not only mechanistically, but also as a fellow being. To do this, he needs to, at some level, experience the world through the horse's eyes, to know what it's like to feel the weight on its hooves, know what it's like to breathe through its nostrils, and to be bothered by flies. To know both the animal's insides while dead and its experience of life. So I imagine him, when he's working, actually employing the comparative experience of feeling the weight on his own heels, as if those were hooves, feeling the breath from his own nose, as though that was the horse's nose, knowing the toughness of a hamstring in the horse because he had the horse's sinew in his own hands. He knew what it felt like. So this comparison is a mirroring of self. It's a becoming. However momentary, it requires him to know the horse as he knows himself. So to depict this animal and its spirit, he necessarily needs to become this animal, become horse. Now, that's kind of an odd thing to say, become horse, but I think it's quite an important jump to make psychologically. So in this way, I see his paintings as mirrors of this experience, where we are able to lose ourselves in the character of this horse, only because, and precisely because, Stubbs has himself lost himself in the same way. So we speak about his skill, his craft, but this isn't just a matter of technique, which I think to someone like Stubbs would, after a while, because of his training and his immersion in the craft, become second nature to him. I think what interests me is the skill of creating a form of encounter or relationship for himself and his animal subject. To me, that's where the art lies. He knows the horse inside out. He knows how to render the materiality of the animal. What is unknown and compelling and a challenge to him is, I imagine, the dissolving of himself into that animal, to abandon his own autonomy, to become the character and the individual he experiences the horse as. You could speak about this process state of mind when looking at many great artists. This is not an approach to making that is unique to him, but what is special is for it to cross the human-animal divide. There are other cultures, of course, which this immersion in becoming, particularly becoming animal, was a necessary part of representing animals. We see the cave paintings of horses at the Chauvet Caves in France. They bring to mind a tradition of evoking a spirit, a performance, if you like, of summoning a power, a dialogue, a contract even, between human and beast, the drive to fix its image and spirit as concretely and as accurately as possible, to make something so elusive and intangible, magical, very real. And I think of traditional cultures as some more cave paintings. And I think of traditional cultures as well when I think of Stubbs, where animals and their spirits are held in respectful esteem. In shamanic cultures, in order to seek information about the world for the community, animal spirits must be consulted. Often it was the job of the shaman to do this, and by moving as and speaking as the animal, he or she could embody it. They could become it, and they could understand it, and therefore ultimately accurately represent this encounter. So that's where the knowledge was. They could represent this encounter to their community. I'm also reminded of elements in traditional Japanese painting, where the depiction of even lowly animals like chickens, common fowl, was endowed with reverence. This Japanese artist, Ito Jakuchu, he lived from 1718 to 1800. The tradition of painting animals is amazing in Japan. And this artist particularly, every animal was considered a fellow individual with a singular spirit. And every animal was seen as unique. There was no sense of generalizing nature. And that, for an artist like Ito, was purposefully related to. That was the point of the work. The art is to represent the spirit and the individuality of this beast. It's not to represent a chicken. And that's the sort of parallel I want to draw with Stubbs. I think that's what he was really representing. Beyond it just being a horse, he was representing it as a fellow being. So the relevance now of Stubbs for me as an artist is this flattening of hierarchy. We see the horse as we recognize ourselves. We see his horses as we recognize ourselves. It is this recognition of our own humanity that by degrees is in every living thing, that is so essential to the questions that we're asking today. So the big question, I think, for us is how we can reimagine our relationship to the non-human natural world. Obviously, ultimately, to save it from our destructive actions. When I look at Stubbs, I can readdress the way I have been culturally defined as a human in relation to other species. So seeing his horse, seeing the humanity, seeing the personhood, seeing the horseness in that horse, enables me, and maybe other people, to step into that world and look back on myself as a human and make that comparison and see that there's more sameness than there is difference. His work offers a space to enter into the consciousness of an animal, breathe its breath, and to look back and see ourselves still intact and enriched. And I would argue that his experience of becoming, or however you want to define it, dissolved the tradition of logic that defined the human-animal divide of his time. And that's the same logic that we still struggle with today. Thank you very much.